But the reports, the monitoring report, and I'm going to email you that, the template you have, that pretty much explains everything you need to know on that 10-page document to be a CRA, to be a coordinator, and a lot of other things. I mean, it won't help that much with regulatory affairs because regulatory is just the binder, whereas regulatory affairs is more how do you respond to the FDA when they're asking things, how do you design a study, how do you set up the roadmap for a study. It's more study planning, but when it comes to CRAs and coordinators, that's like almost everything that you need to know in that template, which is why we have the interns do that when they come here, just so you can get a feel for it. And tomorrow you're going to go with Chris one-on-one on every topic or every flag that you found. But what are some of the big ones? I know you haven't done the report yet. After you do your lecture thing with Chris tomorrow, you can write the report and email it to me, and I'll give you feedback. As if I were your lead CRA. I would say, well, please clarify. And then we might even have you, we're going to have you do the Oklahoma thing, maybe. So, yeah, there's opportunities to do like close-out visits remotely with Chicago site. We'll need that. All right. So what did you discover in this report? What are you,
oh my goodness,
in research, like from those topics, which basically is everything, what do you, if anything, still have some confusions with?
Well, they're just, of course I haven't finished all of the IRB stuff. Let me flag, I'm going to flag this for myself. It's on where I left off.
Yeah, some of the
it's this little section between here and here, that's all I have left. But some of them are kind of repeated because there are some forms that I noticed, some questions that I had, like some of these assessments actually have the booklet in here, and then some weeks when they have the assessment it doesn't have the booklet. But isn't so, and that's like a repeated thing that seems to happen. You know, so, they have a printout saying, you know, that the report's been submitted, but in all cases the booklet that the patient completed, you know, where they have to draw and all of that, it's not always there.
The scale.
So is the booklet, I would suppose, would be a requirement, but where did the booklet go if it's there one time? Why isn't it there every time?
And so as a CRA, because this could be an interview question, what do you do when you're noticing inconsistent documentation practices by the site? Like consistently inconsistent. What would you do?
Well, it would definitely have to go into the report, and basically I would have to sit with the study coordinator and explain that in this case the handbook needs to be included every time, and I would probably ask, you know, do you have the handbook? You know, apparently the patient did do it because there's a report showing that it was submitted. Yeah. But, you know, if the documents were available, and they would have to be documented as to what happened to it and all of that.
But
why it's missing.
What tool as a CRA, or I guess, well, that's not a tool, but what can you do as a CRA besides putting it? There you go. Retrain.
And what's the purpose of the report? What's the overall purpose of the report?
The monitoring report.
Yeah.
The overall purpose, I guess it would be to oversee that everything's being done correctly and to be able to report it to the sponsor as well.
So
it's basically the thing that coordinates between the site and sponsor.
Definitely one of the purposes, right? But there's another purpose too, is to protect you as the CRA.
Right? Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Because maybe the sponsor says, oh, that's not worthy of our consideration. It's now documented if the FDA takes issue with it that you took issue with it, and the sponsor said, no, don't worry.
Well, you know what?
Documentation is everything. It's even where I am, because see, I do advising for students, and whenever some student comes in and sits down and talks to me and asks me a question or wants my help, I immediately send them an email, and I type in there, you know, oh, we talked about such and such, thanks for coming by today, and blah, 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 blah. And then they'll come back and say, thank you, Dr. Rockin. And it's like, boom. I got you.
And even
You
so
verified what I
said.
said.
So what you'll see, what Chris is suggesting is
Yeah.
actually good. It protects
It's
you.
good.
But here's what happens sometimes, and this has happened to me a couple of times.
Sure,
already.
take this out.
The sponsor takes it out,
Yeah.
and they say, okay, here's your finalized report, and they took out the thing that I wanted to put in there. So you want to save your
You want to
drafts.
keep your copy, though.
Save your drafts.
Say the email that you sent it to them that way.
Yeah, like save that version of it before they
Right.
revise it, and then
Right.
save. You'll have the revised one anyways, but for
You'll
yourself,
have your original and the revised.
yes, you want to have your original because years later, let's say your team lead's not even there anymore, and the FDA audits you, and your new team lead is like, "Hey, Angela, what are you doing here?" Like,
Why didn't you mention such
Yeah.
and such? It's not in the report. Well, it wasn't.
then you can show them this is my draft, this is the email. Even if the attachment's not on the email anymore, you have the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So organization is very important as a CRA, and you're really good at that. I mean, I saw your flash drive.
Of everything. I have 10 years worth of
It's
stuff at
insane.
NC.
Her flash drive.
I have a folder for every semester that's broken down for a thing for courses, that's every
Yeah.
single course and everything to do with the course and all the grades and all the consultations and everything for everything.
You have everything.
I'm not missing anything for 10 years.
I'm not good at that.
They had to upgrade my memory in my computer.
You see,
Yeah.
I'm not good at that, so I keep Dropbox and I keep everything in my Dropbox, so that I
It's
still
not
can
organized,
find
but
it.
you can play.
I can find it.
I would have to get way too much. They won't pay for it, and so that's something I would have to pay for myself to store that much. But what I did get is one of the desktop SDs, that you can just store a lot in, and I basically just have one of those for
The
myself.
terabyte.
And, and what I do is I have one at home and I have one at work that they pay for. They did do that. So what I do is every so often, like once a week, I drop everything I keep it on my computer and a jump drive, and then I drop it into each one.
Yeah. I think I might do-
on Mondays. That's what I do on
think I might do a
Mondays.
1-minute video on that for CRAs. Like keep your first drafts, because if you get an aggressive sponsor or a sponsor that doesn't like to see your stuff in there, they'll just take out what you wrote.
Sure. That's why you gotta keep your emails.
Well, but you can keep the email and still lose the attachment somehow.
Yeah, and if you don't work for that sponsor anymore, sometimes you use a company-based email.
That's
and
right.
then, so like, it's like the place where I work, we have an MC email. It's Google Mail, but once I don't work there anymore, I'm going to be cut off.
Yeah, you lose access.
From that.
Yeah, that's
And
another thing. If
so,
CRA loses
what I
access,
did, is I went into, of course, if you're not a computer person, you'd have trouble, but I went into all the settings and everything on my email, and I have a mirror site that I created for myself, a mirrored email, and everything I do gets mirror reflected back to that, and it's been going now for like 5 years.
Huh.
So basically, there's a copy of every email that gets sent through my
It gets
email.
forwarded.
It's my personal with my password that they don't even know exists.
See, I did that for Breakthrough for the site. Because there was a while that I couldn't log in, so now I just had any email that comes to Breakthrough gets forwarded to my Guru email, so I can see it from there. So I have it mirrored also. I had to figure that out, but I didn't do it for that reason, but it serves that purpose as well.
Right.
Yeah, that was a good strategy. So that's important. What part of Alcoa-C is it when the site is sometimes including the patient's drawings, because the scale has them draw things, and then sometimes they don't? What part of Alcoa-C?
Well,
Would that
definitely
be
the C,
violent?
because it wouldn't, the C on the end, because definitely it wouldn't be complete.
Not complete, yeah.
Let's see,
Can you step back for a moment though? What is it that you're referring to is sometimes there and isn't there? Is those drawings?
well, the entire packet that has the questions that are, the one with the mazes and the drawings and all that, the PANSF, I guess.
That's
So
the
so
matrix.
there's a little handbook thing.
You're referring to the matrix. It's called the matrix.
MCCB, that one.
Yeah.
No.
The
Well,
one with drawings is the matrix.
okay, okay. Well, there's one that has a little, let me find this sheet and tell you what it is.
Has a score
Over
sheet.
here.
That could be the pans.
Yeah, it's the score sheet. And some of the MCBB, or whichever one it is also missing. But yeah,
Well, we'll go over that tomorrow. I guess you
No,
did
the
for the purposes
document.
here today. Because I'm curious, I've never been told.
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
booklet, there's a little booklet thing, I guess, with the questions that go with the PANSS. And,
Yeah,
the
the
first,
side
the
panes
first,
and the
the first couple of times and one other time they included the booklet, but most of the times the booklet was missing. And so I'm assuming that's an original source document.
She's
So
referring to the
it's
side
missing
panes.
the original,
Uh-huh.
the little packet.
That I know.
So you're missing the original packet.
And the sky pan. It's called sky pan.
That would be,
Okay.
which part of alcohol would be attributable? No. Original? Where's the original source?
Right, it would be original and possibly contemporaneous.
Yeah. Because they're getting the results from somewhere, so.
Right.
You're,
So
there's
you would-
there's generally a sheet that shows that it's been
attributable to it.
received. So
Yeah.
I would check it off, because there's a little receipt, sheet that they get. And so
Yeah.
the receipt sheet is there every time. It's just that the booklet is not there every time.
So there's a reason that booklet's not there.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Why?
So it was there. So these are photocopies, right?
Okay.
That booklet took up so much room that it would go over the splice and the 3-ring
Right.
binders. So I took them out and threw them away, but they used to
Okay.
be in there.
Okay.
The reason one is still in there shouldn't be any more than maybe a couple of them.
Yeah, there are 2 in the beginning, and then there's one on week 1.
Okay, so the reason those are still
Agreed.
there is just for review purposes, right?
Right.
'Cause they're all the same
Okay.
errors throughout.
I
It was
noticed.
just a safe space. But if this were to happen in a actual setting,
And it does happen in
and it
actual
does,
settings.
right? So, well, one, you would ask them to find and file. That'd be the first thing,
Right.
right? So, and this happens all the time at sites, in which something's missing, and for somehow they should have it, right? In this case, they should have it, or if it's like another sheet that has a score on it, and you see it in the EDC, there's a score there, they should have it, right? So you just ask them to find and file it. Pretty simple,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if they say they can't find it,
right? Then you have a
becomes a bigger
problem.
problem.
Yeah,
And
depending on what it
so
is.
Then you could retrain. You'll probably need to retrain. You could probably look at their SOPs and see what their SOPs say about maintaining original source. And they're probably violating their SOP. Or maybe they don't even have that section. So then you have them create that section and then have them train each other on their new SOP. There's a lot of action items. There's a lot of potential action items from something like that, depending on the site's response to you.
If they can find it or not.
Yeah, but these are all
So-
like great interview, behavioral, situational questions that they could bring up in an interview, or even better, you bring it up, before they even ask you anything about it.
Yeah, I encountered this, and
Yeah, one of the
dealt with
challenging
it.
things I've done is I've noticed sites are missing they're not being consistent on a particular process. I examined that it's because they don't even have an SOP for that, and so I resolved it by having them create an SOP. You as a CRA can't do it for them, but you can encourage them to do it. It could be an action item, right? And you can train them on certain things related to GCP or the protocol. But for their own SOPs, they have to train themselves for it. So those are like, if you said that in an interview, that would show that you know what you're doing as a CRA. That you're checking the right boxes with them, with most of the interviewers.
Mhm.
And you can tell, like we were saying earlier with Miowa. An interviewer can tell based on the details that you're discussing what your true expertise is. Like if it's all academic stuff and theoretical, it doesn't show that you actually know how to do it in a real world setting, as opposed to I discovered this, I checked their SOP, it was missing, or maybe it was there, but they're not following their SOP, right? So those are things that only someone who touches these binders can experience. That's why the internship's so important. It's like the next level, like the bridge between the theoretic and the practical. And bring that up. Don't even wait for them to ask you. Just you bring it up.
Okay.
That's my strategy for interviews. Chris, I don't know, he probably does something else.
Chris just is with his gazing at the sky, waiting for a question.
Yeah.
I'm joking around, but yeah, I mean, I'm not as proactive as Dan. Typically, when I'm interviewing, I mean, I go about it differently, right? I mean, you've interviewed.
Yeah,
it's been a while
different
though.
styles.
I can kind of see where, and you can kind of figure out in the first 5 minutes, or maybe even before the interview, they'll tell you this contract will be for oncology at one site, and it's an infusion. So you know, okay, oncology, you know, infusion, so IP accountability is important, and there's no counting pills, it's more vials and temperature controlled, and making sure they have the supplies. Because the problem with a lot of these oncology studies is they run out of the supplies, like they'll run out of the vials. So your biggest job as CRA is not really accountability, it's inventory. Like how many vials do you have left? How many doses are scheduled between now and my next visit? Oh, they're gonna run out. An action item for the site should be to reorder supplies. With oncology studies, the most important thing of IP is supply, supply levels. It's with non-oncology trials, there's pills, so the issue with IP accountability really is counting the pills and checking for compliance. Well, with oncology, since they're all infusions, it's not like they're not going to dose somebody, so you're not really counting vials. You're checking that they have adequate supplies and checking that they're disposing of them properly and expirations and all that. That's a little different, but that's the point. Like when you go into an interview, you'll kind of know, a little bit of the job description. Sometimes they'll tell you what indication, so you'll know how to focus your responses preemptively.
Be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's always the best. And sometimes you can do everything perfect and just the person they interviewed right after you is just a little better.
Or they don't like you personally.
Yeah, that too. That's happened to me a few times.
Sure. You've interviewed people we didn't like. They like to do the job, but
right. There's a lot of variables.
One thing I've discovered since then in the regulatory, in the big regulatory binder over here, is that at some point partway through the study, while this patient was still there, they actually came up with some helpful things that could be used. It wasn't really required, but a backpack and then a magnet reminder that could actually help the patient, help the subject remember, and something to bring their unused IP and their con meds with them in the backpack and things like that. But I never saw anywhere in here that this was given to the patient ever.
So you saw in the regulatory binder correspondence from the sponsor suggesting this is what you should do. I think they even provided those bags for us.
I don't know.
I think I remember the study.
Yeah, because there's a backpack and a magnet.
I remember they had backpacks. At certain milestones, you would give them a backpack.
We've had that for a number of studies, though.
No, I remember this.
But this was done specifically to help the subject remember to bring their medicine. Right. And I was like, they didn't do that. And obviously throughout the whole time, this subject had a lot of trouble remembering his IP. He was taking them out of the blister packs and putting them in pill boxes, except for the extras that were supposed to be left in the pack. Yeah. But then maybe he would lose the blister pack, or he'd think maybe his roommate thought it was trash and threw it away.
You see, that's a good point.
And all this stuff, and and this happened over and over again in the beginning. And it's like they would state that what the subject said, the subject's excuse, but they would never say, we counseled the subject on leaving it in the blister pack and all these things. They never did any of those
Very
things.
important. When I was a full-time coordinator, I would over-document everything when it came to those kind of things. Like I would write on my note, if that were me, study coordinator gave distributed backpack to patient and reminded patient how to use it, and just the more you can document, the better. You can't control what the patient's going to actually do, but if you document it as much as you can, that's what you should do. So if I were the CRA in that case, I will tell them, especially if that was an issue like it was in this case, over document, describe, detail what you did, what the PI did to the patient.
But can you force the site to do this?
No, you can't force the site to do it.
Yeah.
You can't
So-
force the site to do anything.
So here's the other
Well, that's my
issue.
point.
Here's the
Then
other
put in your
issue with that.
That's my point too.
Okay, so a time or two, this person, doesn't bring the blister pack or whatever. Okay, so a few weeks later, the person does return their blister pack, from the previous week, and they brought in what was left from an old blister pack, but it doesn't state which one it was.
It
So,
would. It would.
what the old, but this one didn't state that in here.
Oh, okay.
The study coordinator did not write down which one was returned, just that old was returned. But there were 3 different old cases, so which old was returned, which one wasn't.
Exactly.
And then it happened one other time. But at the end of the study, we're still missing two pills.
So a couple things there.
And that's why you'll be a good CRA.
Well, there's a couple of things there though to keep in mind, right?
Yeah.
The site and the CRA would know which one was returned, right? It may not be documented in there, but in the master IP log, right, it will show what was returned, right? Because they all have identification numbers.
Right.
So you would know that what got returned. You just it wouldn't correspond to necessarily that day, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's written on there or it's written on the IP log.
Right. But that's another example of over documenting is probably better in that case.
I would agree.
But
I'm
if they-
not
but-
disputing that part of it. I'm just
But
saying you would know what it is.
if the coordinator forgot to write it in on the returned IP log, then you would really be in
Now you
mess,
got an
because you
issue.
wouldn't have a clue which pills
Oh
were
yeah,
taken.
now you get a
and which
problem.
weren't.
Like if they threw it away. or
And
you're
most
saying-
audits-
And then there's one case also where the blister pack was missing, and it just stated that the blister pack was lost, but it didn't state anywhere on that visit day that the patient actually took the medication other than those 2 remaining pills. And so the way it's written, you kind of want to assume that, well, the patient put them in the pill box like they always do, and the blister pack with the 2 remaining pills they didn't have to take were lost. But it doesn't say that.
Over
And so-
document. You cannot over document enough as a site. You
Yeah.
cannot encourage the site enough, especially when there's an issue. And this is perfect that you found this 5 years later, which no other student mentioned. I think because we didn't have the direct binder for the other ones to see. But most audits happen years later. Chances are that coordinator's not there anymore, that CRA's with another CRO, so nobody knows. Truly nobody knows.
Guy's gone.
PI's retired, and so if you don't have that, that's all you have. And if it's not done properly during the study, it's not going to get done later.
Right.
So yeah, that's why you make a good CRA. She reminds me of a CRA right now. She's already a CRA.
So there's a huge lab report here that is
Oh, so
everything's beyond stability on this. Is a huge amount. And what do they do?
you gotta redraw.
Yeah, it wasn't redrawn.
Everything's way out of.
So what do you mean it's not a stability? There's no
The lab
result.
report says beyond stability, so they're basically the
result.
sample wasn't stable, and they only got a small set of results out of everything for that sample.
Okay, so typically
And that was on the week 1. That was week 1
okay, so
of the study.
typically the requirement is to bring the patient back and redraw as soon as possible. However, if by the time they find this out, their next visit also has the lab, they'll just redo it there.
But another file should be written somewhere
Sure,
to explain it.
sure.
Like have a narrative, and that's
Absolutely.
another great interview question. And now the question is that a deviation? Would you put that as a deviation in your monitoring report?
I think it would have to be because the lab reports are part of the requirement
See, I
protocol.
don't think I would.
See, you say no, you say yes.
Well, I think there's 2 sides to
I
that.
think they would be required to have a redraw.
So who decides at the end of the day?
The PI?
No.
No?
Sponsor.
Oh, the sponsor decide.
Yeah.
But so I would put in my report, the way, when I come across these things, it just happened 2 weeks ago when I monitored. I put in my report and you can put action item for the sponsor. Sponsor to follow up on whether this is deviation. And there's action items for the site and for the you can put action item for the sponsor on your report too.
Okay.
And then they'll let you know, and then based on their response, that will go in your follow-up letter, or it won't go in your follow-up letter.
Right, that's how I would handle that.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Okay.
because it was drawn according to protocol.
Right.
Results are not available though.
But again, going back to like the first topic we talked about, you want to keep your draft because if the sponsor says that's not a deviation,
Right, and later
and they
on.
take it out, they'll take it out of your report. All right, and then an auditor, if you don't have your first draft, they're gonna say, "Oh, this CRA never even like looked at this." Well, you did, but it's on your first draft, right? So keep that. Perfect example right there. And unfortunately, you can't consult with the FDA on that because
Right.
they don't do that.
Exactly.
If the FDA wanted to truly provide value to the sponsors, they would have like a,
Training course.
not a training course, they would have like a liaison for each sponsor study, like for questions like this.
And they might, because they do allow some correspondence with questions and such, but, I mean, I'd take it a step further. If the FDA really wanted to be proactive and be helpful, the CFR would offer more guidance than it does. It'd be more specific, right? I mean, nowhere, and I didn't know this, right? I just been preparing the slides for our CRC Academy.
Oh yeah, you have to do that.
Right.
Shameless plug, we have a study coordinator academy.
Yes, so while putting the slides together, I looked up how often does the FDA require GCP training, right?
Mhm.
And they give no guidance on that. One time, according to FDA, should be good enough for your lifespan in research.
So then it's the liability is on the sponsor
Exactly.
to have their own SOPs for
On
that.
how often you need it, right? Which is horrible, right? There
Right,
should be a
some
set
say
standard.
every study you need our GCP training.
Right, or once a year, or once every 2 years, or once every 5 years.
But most take the ultra conservative route and say, hey,
Once a
for
year.
our study, you
Once
do
a
it.
year, for most.
For most?
Yeah.
I remember when they used to do it
They
every
don't
study.
really, they don't really do that anymore. Some do, but it's mostly once a year now.
I think a lot of the vendors consolidated and they're managing that a little better.
Maybe, but still, you would think just to offer the guidance to everybody.
Yeah. No, that's not what they're known for.
No, horribly.
hmm But that's a perfect example right there. That lab result.
Mhm.
I mean, I would put that in my report as a sponsor to follow up on this action item.
Right.
And they didn't sign the ICF for the PK study. There was no signature.
Right, that's because they don't want to participate.
Right.
If they had signed it.
So generally, you wouldn't expect to see, like I was mentioning, the PK results, I didn't see where anything was drawn for it. So I was
So,
wondering if that's why, or.
So like, we're kind of covering this now, so I'll have less to do tomorrow, I guess, but, so here's the question I pose to most
It's a
students,
sub-step.
and I'll pose it to you. So since that, let's say, okay, so the SOPs here in ICF require initial and date for each page, right?
Mm-hmm,
And it's initial and data for each page on the PK.
right.
But let's say
But it's
that's
not signed.
right. But let's say for a moment that the SOPs here did not require initial and date on each page. So that document's completely blank, right? Does it need to be there? So you have a completely blank document. There's no writing on it whatsoever.
Well, if the patient read it and initialed it and dated it,
No,
yes.
no. I'm saying hypothetically, SOPs do not require that, so that's not there, right? The reason that initial and date is here because the SOPs require it.
Okay.
Let's reverse that and say the SOPs don't require that.
Well, it has to be here, it has to be in the binder because at the beginning
It's
of the
completely blank.
study. Yeah, but at the beginning of the study, all of the subjects have the option of opting in or out. And so if you would have to be in the binder to show that they were presented the information, but then there's no proof that they did if they don't initial and date it. So that would probably, how would you, maybe some patient says, well, nobody
So-
told me about a genetic study.
One,
How can you show that?
it depends on what the protocol says, right? I know you didn't thoroughly read it, so I'm not gonna hold a huge money standard here.
Okay.
But if it doesn't mention that form, right, so at any point in the study, if it doesn't mention something, it doesn't have to be there,
Okay.
okay? With some exceptions. Now, with this particular form, it is mentioned in the protocol, so you should have something there to show that it was offered to the patient. I agree with what you're saying, though. I don't like how the CRA handled this. I would have the site put a line through it and say, or in a note, subject chose not to participate.
Exactly.
Right,
And
that's
so
what I was gonna say.
I would do both. Well, there's something called the process of consent, which a lot of sites forget about. Beyond just the forms, on the screening visit, there should be a note either by the PI, preferably by the PI, or at least the study coordinator, talking about the process of consent for that patient. Who did it? When? Did they ask questions? What questions did they ask? I mean, you can get detailed.
Right.
What forms were presented, right? Like, that's the process of consent. The FDA doesn't want to see that. And most SOPs do have that for the sites to follow. So CRA should be looking at not just the forms, but the process of consent, documentation. And some sites, what I've seen, and it's a good idea actually, is they'll have a template of the process of consent where they're asked, were the consents presented? They'll check yes or no. Or, something that documents that this was done by whom. I've seen some as detailed as the patient asked, will this cause headaches? PI said, possibly. I mean, they could be detailed. Right.
We kind of discussed this yesterday.
Yeah.
I said that either there needs to be a written note, but like you just said, or there can be, like you said, a template, okay, with check boxes and all kinds of stuff, that every aspect of the GCP was covered.
Process
given,
of consent.
Given a copy, all of
that. Very important. I'm going to write it down to do a 1-minute video on the process of consent.
You have 2 1-minute videos now.
Yes.
So I had another question too, is they did consent to take part in the genetic sub-study. So would that just come from the blood collection and go, and they would never receive the results at the site, so that none of that is in here, and that's okay?
Yes, I believe that to be true, and I also believe at some point this study or another study that had a genetics sampling study came out after the fact and said we can release these results to those who participated.
Right.
Like after the fact, right? But at the point of consent, that wasn't available.
These are all different aspects of it. That, all these things you found would go as comments. CRA noticed there was no process of consent for this subject. It was unclear whether the PK was even presented, as there is a blank form. CRA is unsure if this is an error, misfiled, or just PK not done.
Yeah, but they were initialed and dated, it just wasn't signed at the end, so, yeah.
It's
so it
not
was
clear.
presented.
Yeah.
It was presented,
But you could avoid putting that into your report. You could just have the site write the note, right? Like
You can have them do it during the visit, but I would still put that in the report. CRA discovered, because it shows that you're doing something when you're there.
Sure.
CRA discovered, site and had the coordinator write the note to clarify.
Clarifying what's going on.
And go even further. Here's a scanned copy of that note. 2 different sponsors, 2 different studies. They may have a separate process for that study as opposed to this.
This gets back to the FDA not offering proper guidance and there being so much confusion in the industry.
That's